Hello and welcome to You All, Canada's most irreverent talk show. Here, the Andrew Lawton Show on True North on this Tuesday, December 12th. I hope you are having a wonderful afternoon. As always, I have to, well, not as always, but just as occasionally in the last couple of weeks of the year, I have to remind you the imminence of Christmas. Now, originally, this was just meant to be like a warning so that if you haven't done your Christmas shopping yet, you can go out and get started. We're 13 days away, but now it's like a hate crime to mention Christmas. The only thing more offensive now is to mention Hanukkah. So I will happily say to all of you, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. I hope you are, whichever you're celebrating or none at all, I hope you have a good one or both of those. But one thing I wanted to bring up here just before we get into it, there has been this rather interesting trend that has taken place over the last 23 hours. Yesterday at the end of the show, I said to send me your questions because I'm going to do like a mailbag type episode next week and field some of your questions. I said they could be about anything and everything. Andrew at truenorthcanada.com is my email address, Andrew at truenorthcanada.com. And oh boy, did some of you take that literally. I have had some just bizarre questions that have come in to such a point where I was wondering if there was some like elaborate campaign just to throw me off guard. So I don't know. Again, I don't know if I'll do all the questions, but I'll try not to filter. I'll give you some of the weird ones because now that I've told you, surely this is piquing your interest. So thanks to those who have sent the questions, except for the one that had a weird one about my socks. And we will get to, maybe I'll do that one. I don't know. Now that I'm thinking of it, that person might have been a bit weird, but anyway. We'll get to the real stuff on the show now. Fear not. This is a bit of an interesting trend we see in Canadian politics, where Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, manages to be the most ineffectual leader of the NDP that the party has ever had, which is really an accomplishment for the New Democratic Party. Like, to be less ineffectual, or I guess less effectual, to be more ineffectual as a party is tremendous. I mean, that's the only thing Jagmeet Singh is succeeding at, is being a failure, because he has managed to get no concessions on any of the issues that matter to the NDP, which is, again, particularly exceptional when that party literally holds the balance of power in Canadian politics right now. They could single-handedly take down the Liberal government because the Bloc Québécois is fed up with them, the Conservatives are fed up with them. It is only Jagmeet Singh that is the one who really cares about this. So why it's so interesting is that this is like the dream scenario for Canadian socialists. They're never going to be in government in Canada at a national level, but they have governmental power. And instead, they just want to tweet about or post on X about, oh, well, the Liberals are failing, and oh, grocery store CEOs are bad, and oh, billionaires are evil, without doing anything. I said a few weeks back when I was in Ottawa, I saw Jagmeet Singh riding away from Parliament Hill on his bicycle. And I was, as I said at the time, so impressed that it was possible to pedal without a spine. But nevertheless, Jagmeet Singh has not proved me wrong in the last few days. The big announcement from the Liberals this week, I talked about it a little bit yesterday, is that the Liberals are coming out with a big, giant national dental program. Okay, what does this mean? Well, the Liberals are going to give 9 million Canadians, let me look at the fine print, up to 9 million Canadians dental insurance. Now, this is going to basically mean that low-income, uninsured Canadians will have access, the government says, to dental care by virtue of the government giving them a dental insurance plan. Now, this sounds big, it sounds transformative. Well, it's not the universal dental care plan that the NDP has always wanted. Nowhere near that. It's not even a new program. This is just an expansion of an existing program that already existed, that the Liberals wanted, that dealt with youth, that dealt with minors and children. And now we're just talking about expanding this ever so slightly. And if you were to talk to the NDP right now, they think that they've pulled off the greatest coup, the greatest achievement, the greatest win in Canadian politics. I'll show two clips. This is Jagmeet Singh talking about this phenomenal NDP victory.
Friends, the day has finally arrived. The NDP dental care program has finally been announced, and that means the rollout is going to start very soon. So I want you to make full use of this program. I've spoken to people who were able to access the under 12 program, and it changed the lives of so many kids in our country. I want to make sure you and your family can access this program. So now that it's been announced, the best way for you to get all the details, for us to get those details to you about how to enroll, how to access the program, is just to text us. Text us, hashtag NDP Dental, and we will give you all the details about how to enroll, how to access the program as soon as we get those details. So again, I'm so excited. This is great news. And now we want to make sure you can access it. So definitely text us and we will give you all the information.
I haven't yet texted Jagmeet Singh. Maybe I will later. Maybe I'll send him a text later on. You can ask him about his socks. But that is one of the things he's asking people to do. You hear the branding there, the NDP Dental Program, the NDP Dental Program. It was the NDP Dental Program announced by the wait for it. Oh, the Liberals. Sorry. Okay, it was the Liberal dental program, but the NDP is getting a little bit excited. No one has been as excited about this as NDP Member of Parliament Don Davies, though. Take a look at Don in the House of Commons this week.
Thanks to New Democrats, 9 million Canadians will have access to the dental care they deserve. Seniors, children, people with disabilities will soon be able to go to the dentist without worrying about the cost. Because of the NDP, families will save thousands of dollars during an affordability crisis. Right. This is the biggest expansion of public health care in half a century. Shamefully, last week the Conservatives again voted no to dental care and putting money back in people's pockets. Can the minister explain the impact of the NDP dental plan on Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
In a time of great global difficulty, in a time where people all over the world are finding things hard, there are those that stand up and provide solutions and talk about how we make things better. And I want to recognize the NDP in stepping forward and talking about solutions, about talking about answers. When we saw the Conservatives voting against dental care, voting against support for seniors, voting against support for persons with disability, voting against our children who need dental support, shame on them, Mr. Speaker. And congratulations to any party that stands up for ideas and getting things done in this country.
I love just the juxta. I mean, they're talking as though they're on the same team there, but the NDP is like, will the Liberal minister talk about how great the NDP is? The Liberal minister gets up. He's like, yeah, we're happy with any party that wants to help us do this. Sean says it reminds him of Howard Dean. That is a deep cut. How old were you during that campaign? Yeah, Howard Dean, the former governor of Vermont, who when he ran for president was like listing all the, Sean says he was 4. Well, you were a very astute, politically aware 4-year-old at the time. He like yelped and screamed as he was reading all the states that he was campaigning in. And that basically cost him the election because everyone looked at Howard Dean. And in America, it was like, oh, I don't want that. I don't want a guy that like shrieks like a little girl to be the president of the United States. So that was the thing. So I was not getting a Howard Dean vibe from Mark Holland. I was getting a Dwight Schrute, blood alone moves the wheels of history vibe with a bit of a smile. That was more the vibe I was getting there. But just on the merits alone, the NDP is saying, this is an NDP plan, and the Liberals are like, yeah, it's a Liberal plan, but you guys helped out, and thanks, and shame on those evil, nasty Conservatives that, wanted kids to have cavities, or whatever the point was that Mark Holland was attempting to make there. But this is the NDP doing a victory lap, and it's not even the biggest thing they wanted. It's not even new. So let's go back to the supply and confidence agreement, which is the coalition, coalition, the costly coalition, as the Conservatives call it, between the Liberals and the NDP that came in the wake of the 2021 election. The agreement, if you look at the bullet points there, what they've all said, they're going to launch a new dental care program for low-income Canadians. It's going to start with 12-year-olds in 2022. Then it's going to expand. And in 2023, it's going to be there for seniors and persons with disabilities with full implementation by 2025. So this was already what they had agreed to. And the thing is, it was already something the Liberals wanted. It was something the Liberals campaigned on. Now, you look at other things that have been proposed there, they are nowhere to be found. For example, the NDP's pursuit of a universal national pharmacare program, which was supposed to come by the end of 2023. Now, by my count, that is 19 days away. Is my math right there? 19 days. They have to come up with this national pharmacare program, which just is not happening right now. Now, to be clear, I am not advocating for these policies. I'm not saying I want these things. I'm not saying that Canadians should have to pay for them. What I am pointing out is that the NDP and the Liberals have always been singing from the same songbook on this, and even then the Liberals are not doing what the NDP wanted. The NDP could literally hold this government to account in a real way by saying, you do this by December 31st, or we pull your support, we go to an election, and Justin Trudeau is going to be surfing full-time on the beaches of Tofino. But that's not what the NDP is doing, because to do that, you require a spine. To do that, you require a backbone. And now we have in Canada this government that effectively operates with a majority mandate because the NDP is not wanting to do its role of being an opposition party. Now, I've played these clips on the show, and I'm doing it just because it's fun. I don't want to pretend that there's like a really serious point, but I'll try and make a serious point out of this. The NDP has in the past tried to position losses as victories. Do you remember Jagmeet Singh's dance moves after the 2019 election? Pepperidge Farm remembers. Yeah, I love the song, by the way. I don't know the song. I don't know what the words are. The words could be, we're going to be a failure as a party and not do anything in Punjabi. But nevertheless, he's dancing. He's got good beats and good grooving and all of that. I'm not arguing with the dance moves, but this is a guy who won 24 seats. Going into the election, he had 39 seats. He comes out with a 15-seat loss, gets 15.98% of the vote, and he's dancing as though he won. Now, this surely was a one-off, right? Well, let's go to the 2021 election. In this election, Jagmeet Singh had started with 24. He went up a little bit. He went to 25 seats. This election, 17% of the vote, a slight improvement, but do the dance moves fit the achievement? Let's take
I don't know. That's really cute. Okay, cool. Okay.
That was a bit more of an austere dance move. I mean, on that election, he had actually gone up at least a seat, so you'd think he'd be able to be a little bit more forceful, but he'd used up all the good moves in 2019. Jagmeet Singh, you could be the most powerful and influential player in Canadian politics. It pains me to say that, and the fact that you don't realize it or don't use that power is why you are never going to be the prime minister. That's not an endorsement or an anti-endorsement. I'm simply stating an observational fact there. Moving on from this for just a few moments here, I wanted to talk about this somewhat breaking story that came out today, where Canada has, alongside several other countries, effectively started calling for a ceasefire in Israel. This is a joint statement by the Prime Ministers of Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. They say in this statement, I won't read the whole thing, that we want to see this pause resumed. They had Israel and Hamas a humanitarian pause and support urgent international efforts towards a sustainable ceasefire. This cannot be one-sided. Hamas must release all hostages, stop using Palestinian civilians as human shields, and lay down its arms. There is no role for Hamas in the future governance of Gaza. So there is still criticism and condemnation for Hamas, but effectively this is a statement that is endorsing the idea that it is incumbent on Israel to lay down its arms and stop fighting against the brutal terrorist group that killed more than 1,400 Israelis and has continued to wage war on Israel and has called for the annihilation of Israel and the Jewish state. Israel's not supposed to fight back against those people. Now, if you don't follow this issue or you don't follow geopolitics, which I would forgive you for not doing, you may not understand what's at stake here. The word ceasefire sounds nice. Who doesn't like ceasefire? It's the same as peace. Peace is great. Everyone loves peace. Give peace a chance, right? But the problem with a ceasefire is that it's rooted in a fundamental idea that Israel does not have the right to defend itself. And I am fully sympathetic to the realist position here that Canada and the US and the UK should not be involved in a foreign war. But supporting Israel is not about involving yourself in a war. It's about just looking at a situation and realizing what the right thing to do is. And this idea of whether supporting Israel is meddling or whether it is something that is in a country's national interest has become an interesting discussion. And it's one that I wanted to take up with Brian Lee Crowley, who is the managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And I ran into him when I was in Alberta a couple of weeks back filming some interviews with other folks. And I said, Brian, I got to get you on this. And it's really made itself out to be a timely and prescient interview. Take a look. I'm joined by the managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which is, I don't want to say very quickly because you've been putting the effort in, but has very notably been becoming just an absolute powerhouse on so many discussions on domestic policy and foreign policy in this country. Brian Lee Crowley. Always a pleasure. Good to see you, Brian.
Hendrik, I can't tell you how much I like being on the show with you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad to do it in person. We have done that. Actually, I don't know if we've ever done it with you on the show in person. I know we've done panels together. Well, look, foreign policy is often one of these issues that you get people in politics that occasionally like to geek out on, and people, the conventional political wisdom dictates, are not really motivated by it. Voters don't really care about it. But this has been a year in which I'd say it has been on the agenda, both with China, notably, and now really notably the Middle East and Israel. And let's just start there, because Stephen Harper, when he was in power, had a very markedly strong position on Israel. He was very well liked there, very well regarded there. Donald Trump in the U.S. did something very similar. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which was supposedly going to open Pandora's box and really hasn't. Now you fast forward to today, we have Justin Trudeau, who's the Prime Minister in Canada, and I think has kept the Canadian position of support for Israel, but a lot more modestly. Where would you such a say? Well, I don't think I'll be appointed ambassador anytime soon, but why does that relationship matter for Canada?
Oh boy, that's such a great question, Andrew. I think because the Middle East is one of the most important and most volatile places in the world. And because Israel is an island of liberal democratic values in a sea of instability, autocratic regimes, dangerous behavior by Iran, Syria basically engaged in a killing spree of its own citizens. I mean, in every part of the Middle East, danger signals flash. And we as the liberal democratic world, not just Canada and the United States, but our NATO allies, all of whom rely, for example, on energy that comes from the Middle East, what happens in the Middle East matters enormously to us. And in a sense, I think Israel is the canary in the coal mine. As long as Israel survives and thrives in the Middle East, I believe that we in the liberal democratic world can continue to defend our interests in that region. And if ever Israel was to falter and fail, I think it would be disastrous for all of us. So it's not just that I think that this is important for Israel. Obviously it is. What's going on is an existential threat to Israel. But it's also terribly important to us. We have huge interests at stake in the Middle East. The only people who see the world in the way that we do, from a liberal democratic perspective, the only people are the Israelis.
One of the challenges we've seen on the domestic front on this is that there's been an increase in, especially on the political right, I'd say, in isolationism. And I'm sympathetic to a lot of that. I'm sympathetic to the idea that we need to be more independent and protective of our sovereignty. And I'm very sympathetic to the argument that getting involved in conflicts that don't affect us is not advisable, and that you can be trapped in foreign wars, certainly in American context. But why is that? I mean, that attitude, I'd say, has reared its head in very ugly ways on Israel. When you get people that say, it's not our problem, I don't care. What's your thought on that? Because I know you've seen that similar to me, and certainly on Ukraine and Russia, we've seen that attitude.
Yes, and it's quite astonishing to me that people in Canada might not get the idea that as a medium power in the world, an important medium power, we're one of the 10 largest economies in the world. We have some weight in the world, but that Canada somehow people seem to think we can make it alone. That we don't need to rely on other people who see the world we do in the way we do, and that we promise to support them and they promise to support us when push comes to shove. I mean, this is why we were one of the founders of NATO. The whole idea behind NATO, the fundamental, motivating idea behind the creation of NATO was that other than the United States, none of us could stand alone in the face of an existential threat. We rely on each other. We have promised each other if there's, if someone attacks one of us, they attack all of us. This idea of mutual defense. And the idea that we can afford to be indifferent to the fate, especially of other countries, that subscribe to liberal democratic values, that we could stand aside from those things and, as the old saying goes, we keep feeding the tiger in the hope that he'll eat us last. We're in Ukraine and we're supportive of Israel because the things that they represent, as far as I'm concerned, are things that Canada wants to defend in the world, and we can't do it alone. And so we must be prepared to step up when those values are challenged anywhere in the world, because, if we don't, the next place they'll be challenged is a lot closer to home.
Well, I think on Israel, we certainly see that. I mean, you talk about Israel as being a canary in the coal mine, and I think the anti-Semitism that we've seen shockingly brazen displays of in the last 2 months in Canada are a tremendous example of this. And I think you could point to a number of factors here. I think you can point to immigration, you can point to education, you can point to, perhaps some of the media playing a role in this and academia playing a role in this. But all of this is to say, if we allow those ideas to exist unchallenged and uncriticized, there is no Israel. And that's, I think, a tremendous, tremendous display. And I think that's where the story is very much a domestic one as much as it is a global one.
Yes, I have to say, Andrew, I've been deeply disturbed by what I've seen in Canada over the last couple of months. I have had Jewish friends come to me and say, Brian, I never thought I'd say this, but if it comes to that, will you hide me? Well, will you hide me? I never thought that I would see circumstances in Canada in which our Jewish citizens would be frightened that there was no longer a place for them and that they might actually physically be threatened. And now, of course, we see, university professors arrested and charged with vandalism against a business in Toronto. What was the reason for the vandalism? It was owned by a Jew. Owned by a Jew. And so these are...
No, it's crystal milk. I mean, that's the thing. People overuse Nazi and Holocaust comparisons, but this is literally what happened in 1930s Europe.
And my Jewish friends say to me, look, people say that they're sympathetic and so on, but people are not speaking up. I think that the idea that what's going on, for example, between Israel and Hamas is about foreign policy and not about the nature of Canada is completely wrong. I think what the conflict between Hamas and Israel is bringing to the surface conflicts that we didn't really think existed in Canada. We're discovering otherwise.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the big challenges of multiculturalism. Now, let me say, I believe that I wouldn't go so far as to say the diversity is our strength in the Trudeaupian way, but I do think one of the things that makes Canada so unique is that it has this cross-section. But the challenge there is that we've seen an importation of conflict.
Yes.
Khalistan is a notable example of this, and as we're seeing in the last couple of months, Israel. Can you put the genie back in the bottle on that?
Well, you see, I think that one of the things that we don't really understand very well as Canadians about immigration is that people don't come here by and large to live as they lived in the country that they came from. It's expensive and disruptive to immigrate. You don't come so that you can do exactly the same thing here that you were doing back home. People don't come here to change Canada. People come here to be changed by Canada, to become Canadian. And I think it's terribly important that we understand as Canadians what it is that is great about Canada, and that we are completely entitled to demand that newcomers to Canada respect and understand. I think this idea that look, I'm the great grandson of immigrants from Ireland, and you know that the Irish imported some conflicts between North and South, between Irish and English and all. Eventually, we were able to get rid of those that transplanting of.
I was going to say they haven't necessarily there, but certainly here they have. Yeah.
We managed to get that under control. My family has some experience of this. The first major political assassination in Canada, D'Arcy McGee, was killed by an Irishman bringing that conflict to Canada. So we have a stake as a society that is dependent on immigration and that appreciates immigration and wants immigration. But we have a responsibility to make sure that we make clear to newcomers to this country, you can't do certain things here because it conflicts with what makes Canada great. It conflicts with the rule of law. It conflicts with the respect we have to have for each other and the different backgrounds and ethnic origins and so on that we have. There is no place, in my view, for immigrants to Canada to congregate in their tens of thousands in major cities in Canada and call for the death of other members of the Canadian community. This is not tolerable in a society like Canada. And I think we're too afraid to defend the values which actually make Canada a place worth coming to. And I think the conflict with Israel, between Israel and Hamas, is giving us a great object lesson in how important it is to be clear about what it means to come to Canada and the behaviors that Canadians will accept.
Brian Lee Crowley, thank you.
Pleasure.
That was my interview with Brian Lee Crowley of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. It was recorded a couple of weeks ago. I always like to give that context but in that case, there really wasn't anything that has become outdated. And I'd say, if anything, it's probably become even more accurate and more truthful as time has gone on, and we've gotten a bit more of a sense of how things are shaking out. One issue I wanted to bring up that's completely unrelated to this. Yesterday, I had like a great segue from one topic to the other. Today, I don't have that. So we just have to do back when I worked in talk radio, like commercial breaks were great because you could just like go to commercial and not have to worry about awkward transitions or anything like that. But nevertheless, wanted to talk about generosity. It's a season of giving, of course, although not as much in Canada. This year, a new report from the Fraser Institute finds that generosity is at a profound low. There's been a steep decline, and Canadians are no longer giving. Now, is this because Canadians are greedy and miserly, or is it because they are simply so cash-strapped from all of these other circumstances they can't afford to be giving with as much generosity as they have previously? Jake Fuss is the Director of Fiscal Studies with the Fraser Institute and joins me on the show. It's always good to talk to Jake. Jake, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on today.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
So we'll get into the why in a moment, but let's just first identify what the trend you're seeing here is.
Yeah, well, every holiday season we track the generosity of Canadians looking at donations claimed on your tax returns. And what we found is that in 2021, we saw that the lowest percentage of tax filers were making donations since the year 2001. So less than 1 in 5 Canadians on their tax receipts were making those donations. It was about 17.7% of Canadians. That compares to 2001, where it was about 25.2% of tax filers making those donations. So we've really seen a steep decline, not only nationally, but just in every province across Canada. It's not unique to Ontario. It's not unique to Alberta. It's really occurring across all of the provinces in Canada. And it's a trend that we've been seeing consistently over the last 2 decades.
Now, one of the challenges, of course, here is that you're a couple of years behind on the data you have available. 2021, we have, of course, inflation, cost of living issues. You also have lingering effects of lockdowns. You have some of these COVID issues. How much do you think those are weighing on this versus some of the broader economic trends and the climate that we're still seeing in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, those could certainly be a factor, but I mean, what we see is that this has been a trend before COVID, during COVID, and then it's likely going to be a continuing trend coming out of COVID as well when we get the data for 2022 and 2023 from the Canada Revenue Agency on those tax slips. So ultimately, it's really been a sign of broader economic concerns over the last number of years and the last number of decades too. We've really seen that consistent decline in all provinces in Canada, both in the share of income that's being donated to these charitable organizations and also then the percentage of tax filers making those donations. So it's really been this consistent concerning trend, and it hasn't really, had too much of an effect with COVID or before or after. Likely moving forward with cost of living and housing remaining consistent issues too, we could possibly see even further declines in the years ahead.
I know the data do not tell you the why. They just tell you the what, and you can see that pretty clear. But is there any other? I know Cardis has done some work on this in the past. Are there any good, compelling explanations for what is driving this trend? Because as you mentioned, and when you look at the chart, it's a pretty straight line. I mean, you get a few blips here and there, but generally speaking, it's a pretty clear decline. Do we know why that is, or have suspicions of why that is?
Yeah, so even though we don't track the exact reasons why this occurs in our study, we do know possible reasons why people choose to give to charities through economic research. And what it generally points to is generosity is often sensitive to how much after-tax income people have available to them. So if your income levels are not increasing or your tax bill is going up, for instance, then you have less money available to you to make those charitable donations. Other things that can also play a factor in why people choose not to give or choose to give would be, things like religious affiliation, the age of the population. Generally, the older you are, the more likely you are to donate. Also, education levels. These are all things that can play a determining role in whether or not people choose to give to charitable organizations. But ultimately, I think one of the big factors here is possibly after-tax income, because that is one of the sensitive factors to charitable giving in general.
I'm speculating here, but when you mention after-tax income, I think there are two aspects. One is just how many dollars do you have to give? How much discretionary income do you have? And the other, I think, is the one, and this would be a bit harder to quantify, but what message is the government sending when they're taxing you? They're basically saying, we're taking care of people, you don't need to. And I think that must be factoring in to some extent, where you get people that are in a situation where they assume that, well, if I'm being taxed this much, maybe I don't need to donate to charity to solve these problems. I'm sure government's looking after it.
Well, one of the things that we've seen really recently is the tax bill is rising much faster than the costs of basic necessities like food, shelter, and clothing even. So even though those costs are going up, tax bill is going up even faster. So that obviously leaves less money available for not only basic necessities, but other things as well, whether that's entertainment or remaining expenses to give to charitable organizations too. So currently in Canada, about 45% of the average family's income is going towards their tax bill. And that's more than what's going towards basic necessities. So about 36% of your income is going to housing, food, and clothing combined. So this is a really concerning trend that we've seen now for consistently really over the last decade or two in Canada. And it's probably going to continue for the foreseeable future.
And I know this goes outside of this particular study, but you've done some work in the past, I think it was earlier in the fall, where you looked at just rising federal spending. And there was no real tax relief that was being put to Canadians or is being put to Canadians by the government, is there?
Nothing really tangible at the moment right now. I mean, and we're really in need of some tax reform in Canada because, we have this waning productivity challenge. We have collapsing business investment in Canada. We also have concerns with living standards as our real GDP per capita, which is basically a broad measure of living standards in Canada, has either been declining or stagnant for quite some time. So even though our economy is growing overall, our income levels on a per person or per household basis are not really increasing over time. So there's a lot of concerns here with the tax system in Canada. And even though we have this massive kind of increase in government spending over the last 8 years or so, we haven't really seen, the results from an economic growth standpoint. So we've seen, debt increase quite massively. We've also seen, that spending increase by about 25% since the beginning of COVID as well. And we have this bigger size of government, but we don't really have much to show for it. So ultimately, we need to pursue policies that actually boost that economic growth, that actually improve the living standards for Canadians, because right now we're not seeing those results.
Well, it's a bit of a far-fetched Christmas wish, but I think definitely a worthwhile one. Jake Fuss, Director of Fiscal Studies for the Fraser Institute. Thanks for coming on, Jake.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Cardis has done some very useful work on this. The Fraser Institute annually does work on this that's very solid, and they look right at the data. I mean, it's a pretty unavoidable reality. These are the things. I mean, theoretically, people could be donating to non-registered charities or not claiming their charitable contributions on their taxes. By the way, if you are donating to charity and not claiming your tax receipt on your taxes, you are giving Justin Trudeau more money, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Same as in Ontario, we have this line item on our tax returns called the Ontario Opportunities Fund. Now, what you might ask is the Ontario Opportunities Fund. It is a voluntary payment to pay down the provincial debt that you can do. So I could willingly say, you know what, I'd like to donate my tax refund to cover the terrible, horrendous spending decisions by this government. Anyone who pays the Ontario Opportunity Fund should also be ashamed of themselves. This is it's an early Festivus here. I've got a lot of problems with you people, as Frank Costanza would say. Well, we are coming out of time today, but I mentioned earlier on this comparison that Sean raised between Don Davies and Howard Dean. And instead of just paying attention to the show, Sean has apparently just put this clip together that I'm to show for you now.
Last week, the Conservatives again voted no to dental care and putting money back in people's pockets. Can the minister explain the impact of the NDP dental plan on Canadians?
All right. Well, so you're forgiven for not paying attention to the Brian Lee Crowley interview, Sean. That was 13 seconds, well worth the wait there. That does it for me. We will be back tomorrow with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show. We got a special interview with Mark Morano, fresh off his trip to Dubai for COP28. Always a good time. I don't know if he rode the camel in like he did to Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27 in Egypt. I don't know. Surely there are some camels in Dubai. I mean, they're probably like Maserati camels or Lamborghini camels, only the high-end designer import camels, but I'm sure they exist there. So we'll check in with Mark Morano on tomorrow's show. Also, speaking of Ontario, no, don't tune out if you're from Alberta. We're going to be chatting about this phenomenal new book about Mike Harris and his legacy, which is a story about conservatism as much as it's a story about Ontario politics. That's also on the show tomorrow, and lots of other stuff coming up in the remaining week here. So do tune in. We will talk to you tomorrow. Thank you. God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.